Hi everyone, welcome today's live. Um, let's just quickly get housekeeping out of the way. This is being broadcasted to a number of different platforms via StreamYard. So if you do make a comment, please give it permission to share your name, else we won't be able to know who the question came from. It's not a problem if you don't want to do that. That's fine, but just so you know. So, can somebody start put comments in the comment box just so I know that you can hear me okay, see me okay, etc. So if we can do that, that'll be great. Okay, perfect. I can see people logging in. So today we are doing the follow up to the leadership panel from back in July. And if you recall, we had Janelle Bieler with us from Adecco Canada. And there were so many questions. Each and every person, panelist, agreed to come back live to continue the discussion and answer some more questions. So, without further ado, let me introduce and bring Janelle in.
Hi, Suki. Thank you.
How are you doing?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me back.
Yeah, thank you ever so much for offering to come back. I know I've got tons of questions ready for you. Um, but if you could just quickly introduce yourself to those viewers that don't necessarily know who you are. I find that really hard to believe, but just in case, just share with the audience who you are.
Absolutely. So I'm Janelle Bieler. I am the president of Adecco Canada. I'm actually new to Canada. So I relocated up here right before Christmas to take this role with Adecco. I've been with Adecco for about 7 years, but was most of that time in the US. So I'm new to Canada. Don't hold that against me. Still learning, but I've been such an amazing welcome. I love doing these types of conversations. It's been so great, Suki, just to get to know some of the other leaders in the industry as well as get an opportunity to talk a little bit about what we're doing here. It's a lot of exciting things going on. So I'm excited for this next hour.
Oh, wow. You know what? That's the perfect segue into my very first question for you. So, here's the thing, right? Every time we speak, your business is just growing. It's just leaping forward in leaps and bounds. It's moving in different directions, and particular areas are just kind of exploding. As you said, you're new to the market, new to your team, and there's the whole remote, doing everything remotely. How are you invigorating and kind of breathing life into a tired organization and pushing everybody to grow and think differently?
It was very interesting, as you said, coming up here because when I got here, we were still in lockdown. So, and we're still a bit hybrid in terms of people being back 100% and some people still working from home. So I think I've met maybe 20 colleagues now, actually face to face. So that has added a whole other element, I think, to kind of leading through the change of the pandemic. But one of the things that I really took to heart when I first got up here was getting to know my teams and to try and understand kind of the culture that I was coming into, especially coming into a new country, right? And trying to understand what makes everybody tick. So I spent a lot of time really engaging with the teams and with clients to understand, right, what was working, what wasn't working. And to your point, I think what I found was that in 2020, people were exhausted. I think we're still in a little bit of that, right? We're still recovering from the effects of last year. And I realized too that it was everybody was being very reactive, right? Every day something was changing. We we're trying to figure out how to adapt to it. But what we weren't doing was looking at the overall changes that we were making in our business and saying, how can we push this even further? How can we actually capitalize on this? Okay, I know we don't love working remote, but is there good that we can get out of that? How can we do more with that? Can we further our use of technology? Can we automate more things? Can we centralize different functions? Like what can we do to kind of take what we've been learning in this last, year and a half of being in the pandemic and find ways to make it actually drive the business forward? And what was interesting about that is I think it created a little bit of a new, renewed sense of excitement in the teams, right? Because rather than just kind of feeling like you're surviving and getting through the day, people started to feel like, okay, I can control this and now we can find ways to thrive. So it got people very excited about what can I do to push a little bit more? What can I do to offer an idea that maybe I think is crazy, but could work because maybe it's something that I'm doing in my new work environment that nobody else has thought of. So I think that helped with creating an excitement with the team. And we also focused a lot. I think this is actually something I hear a lot from my clients and other people that I talk to as well. Focused a lot, not just on reinventing ourselves, but focused on what is our purpose? Like, what are we actually here to do? And getting people re-excited about the impact that they make every day. I think we take for granted sometimes in this industry what we actually do and how important the work is, right? Because not only do we find people jobs, but we work with people to help give them more skills to get better jobs. We work with companies to make them stronger. And we forget about that sometimes when we're in this crazy go, 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 just take care of every client. And then the pandemic hits on top of that. So I think those two pieces were probably the two biggest things that we did to really change the culture and get people focused on what they could do better every single day.
Mhm. It's interesting, as you were talking, I wrote down the word empowered, right? Um, and sense I'm getting third party, talking to your teams, working with your teams, and actually, interesting enough, potential candidates for you guys is there's this sense of empowerment. There's this sense of empowerment. And you said earlier about people having ideas and that free thinking, and from where I'm sitting, it's almost like you've empowered everybody, and everybody feels that their voice is going to be heard, right?
Absolutely.
Not necessarily you're doing it their way. That's not what I'm implying here, meaning here, but it's that. And we talked about this on a panel last time as well. When people feel empowered, they feel heard, they're going to move forward, right?
Yes.
And um, the reason I asked this question was on the last panel, I actually had an audience member message me before when I put the panel out, and they realized you were going to be on a panel, and he actually messaged me and was like, I'm having front row seats because I want to hear what she's doing differently. So the fact that you've come back to answer some more of these questions is, and it's just testament to the work that you've been doing.
Thank
The
you.
results are there. So just wanted to get that bit in as well. So let me move on to the next question then, because you've brought up some great points. Janelle, as I've heard, you talk about Adecco's purpose, right? Multiple times in our conversations and some of the posts and things like that. Um, you always say Adecco is about making the future work for everyone. What does that actually mean here to you in the context of Adecco Canada then?
I love this question because when I first came up here, one of the biggest things that I was trying to talk with the teams about, I love that you brought up empowerment too, because I think that was a big theme of what we've really done in these past 9 months is trying to make people feel comfortable with sharing ideas and ways that they think we can be doing things differently and kind of kick that curiosity into gear, right? Ask questions, give suggestions, and feel comfortable with that. And when we looked at the purpose, right? So making the future work for everyone sounds amazing, right? It's this great tagline that marketing put together, and I love it. But what does it mean was exactly the question I asked to my team. What does this mean to you? How do we actually do this every single day? Because if we're going to say that this is what our purpose is, we need to also define what that's going to look like for us. And it really came down to two things that the teams, and this was through a lot of conversations and collaboration and input from the teams, right? And really understanding how different groups within the organization maybe felt that they could impact this. And I think the number one thing that came out of it, the first thing was impact, right? If we're going to make the future work for everyone, how do we impact every single group of people that we interact with? So we started really trying to define the experience for a candidate, for an associate, for a client or a prospective client, for our colleagues, and then I think most importantly, for the communities that we sit in. Because there is so much that's happening kind of in the world of work. It's not just our clients who are struggling with problems to figure out how to staff their workforce, but our communities are having the same problems with either worker shortages or people that don't have the right skills. So I thought that was a really great observation. It came from somebody on the team that's another huge piece of how we impact. And we can't forget about that community piece and strengthening that. And as we started to really dig into defining that journey and trying to figure out how do we bring all these groups of people along with us on the journey together, it also became really apparent that we needed to spend some time focusing on upskilling and reskilling. So that was kind of the second piece that came out about making the future work for everyone. I mean, it's no secret we're in a huge job crisis, right? Globally, there is a shortage. Like workers' needs have changed, employers' needs have changed, skill sets have changed, and it's just a lot that we're trying to figure out. And so, starting to really identify where those gaps are at and how we can try to fill them became kind of the second piece to what we could do here to impact the workforce and impact the future of work in Canada. So more to come on that too. We have a lot of resources being invested and some neat things that are going to come out in 2022. So maybe something I'll save for a future panel with you to share. But I think it's really important when we talk about that purpose to not only talk about the impact, but really it's powerful when you think about the fact that we can curate talent. We can impact the future skills that people need. If we can understand what they are, we can actually put things in place to help people get there. And I think that's, again, something we sometimes forget as an industry, that we can help guide people down that journey. So when you look at what that means to us in Adecco Canada, that's kind of what it boiled down to, of how we were going to make that impact all across the board.
Yeah, and I'm just going to quickly apologize. The office next door has got some sort of alarm going, so that's what you're hearing in the background. So sorry about that. But coming back, one of the things that you were talking about, and I wrote down, is all the impacts, because we tend to look at impact from a business perspective and how does it impact our staff, our candidates, and stuff like that. But that community piece, right, is really important. Um, and and I know Adecco has the global initiative as well, which is great. But it's like, what is the impact we're making to our local communities? And if I just stick with Canada, the impact could be completely different in Toronto versus Edmonton, Winnipeg, wherever you are, right? So that community piece is really that localized piece. And it's great that you're getting there, and it's not being dictated top down. You're actually talking to your staff, and then bringing them and bringing their ideas forward. Because again, this all feeds back into, certainly in my opinion, employee welfare, right?
Yeah.
It's that, again, I'm saying it again, it's that empowerment and them feeling as if they're being heard. Fantastic. So let me fire another question at you. um, the reality is, right? So, as employee welfare, it's here's the thing: it's challenging times, right? And the topic of mental health and mental awareness is one that has been brought to the forefront by the pandemic, right? I know your organization has been doing a lot to address this, and with this week being Mental Health and Mental Awareness Week, would you mind sharing some of your thoughts on what companies can actually do to avoid colleague burnout? And one area I also want to just add to that question is, we tend to look at employee burnout, and if I just stick with our industry, our branches, but it's also at executive level,
Yeah.
right? So if you wouldn't mind speaking to that, that'd be great.
It's so funny. I read an article just this morning. There was a new study put out by Korn Ferry that said 89% of workers are burned out right now. 38% are extremely burned out, would categorize themselves at like the worst level of burnout. And I just thought that was such a staggering statistic, because we feel it, right? We feel it in our organizations. We feel it in the organizations, the clients that we work with. It's the new pandemic. People are burned out because we've shifted, right, to working in a remote environment in a lot of cases, where now the hours are more, right? We don't have to commute. So now we're online, we're always connected, and it's making it tough. It's making it tough to draw the lines to say, when does work end and when can I actually get a break from it? And I think there's, you brought up some of the things that we're doing. I think there's a lot of things organizations can do in, formal ways, whether it be, offering more benefits or trying to add more around mental health or breaks that they can give people. But I always like to talk about what you can do as an individual, right? Because whether I oversee one person or I oversee 100 people, I can set an example of what's okay and what's not okay. And I talk about this with my teams all the time. It has to start with every single person leading by that example. So there's two things that I think are really important. And I'm just going to tell you right now, if you're a leader that's on this call, you're going to probably struggle with one of them because I know I did. Guaranteed, you'll say, yeah, that sounds great, but it's a little bit hard to put in practice. But I think the two biggest things is one, you've got to define the boundaries as a leader. You may not work a normal 8 to 5 work job, right? In our business, sometimes we have to be 24/7. We have on-site presence, things like that, where it requires different hours. But you as the leader can set the rules for what work hours are and stick to them with your communication, right? So if work hours are Monday through Friday, don't email on the weekends. Don't give people that pressure to respond. If the boss is emailing them, they're going to feel pressure to respond. If somebody is pinging you, right, or texting you, there's so many different ways we can connect now with colleagues, people feel obligated. So I think it's our job as leaders to make sure we set those boundaries within reason and make sure that we really stick to them so that we don't bother people in the time that we've kind of established as our personal time. The second thing is a huge pet peeve of mine is when we talk about PTO. It makes me crazy when people say PTO is pretend time off because that is how we treat it. I don't know if you've ever heard that, but it makes me crazy because we should be giving people real time off. We shouldn't have to be checking emails and checking messages when you're supposed to be off for the day. And this is the one that I say is really hard to do as a leader because you have to set the example. You have to turn on your out of office. You have to not respond to the email that can wait until tomorrow. You have to let your teams know how they can reach you if there's an emergency. You know, if the building's on fire, somebody needs to be able to text you and know they can get you. But you have to do those things yourself so that your teams know that it's okay for them to do it too. And we started really pushing that probably in about Q2 this year. And it made me so happy when I would email someone, I would see their out of office come up and I wouldn't get a response till they came back because we wanted that kind of behavior. We wanted people to be able to unplug and recharge, right? And I think you brought up leadership. Leaders need to do that too. So as hard as it might be for you to turn on the out of office, for you to not look at the emails, you have to do it to give yourself a break too. And you know, of course, there's times when things don't get completely wrapped up before you leave on PTO, and you may have to pay attention a little bit to your emails, but it needs to be the one-off, not the regular, so that your teams can understand that that's what we need to be doing to give them a break.
I think in our industry, it's kind of pre-pandemic. It was almost worn like a badge of honor by a lot of leaders, right?
Yeah.
Do what you got to, and it was drummed in. Do what you got to do to get the job done. It's not a 9 to 5 job, and I kind of do believe it's not a 9 to 5 job, just because we work with people, right? Our
Yeah.
candidates are doing their daytime job. So there is a little bit of flexibility into that. But I love the fact that you talked about defining boundaries. I was with a coaching client yesterday and we were doing a strategy session. And I was actually horrified when they told me that one of their recruiters tends to work till about 11 every evening.
Wow.
Yeah, tends to work till about 11 every evening. And they don't want her doing that.
Yeah.
Right, that's not what they want. And one of the conversations we were having is, how do we ensure that they understand that that is not an expectation, and that's going to lead to the burnout, because those burnout figures are horrifying,
Right.
right?
And
Sorry,
you
go on.
bring up a really good point as well too, because you're right. Our jobs are not always, they don't always fit in this nice little framework of when I need to be working or when my candidate's available. And I think something that we tend to forget about is that we just need to give people that flexibility and measure the productivity, right? I think in our industry maybe is a little further along with that maybe than other industries because we are sales and recruiting and we measure KPIs and we look at outcomes. But that whole idea of measuring the outcome and the productivity versus the amount of hours, I mean, at the end of the day, that's what we need to do. We need to get people out to work, and looking at that instead of looking at how many hours you logged in, I think has been a big shift for our organization, and a welcomed one, right? Because it's giving people the ability, if maybe they want to work till 11 o'clock at night, but they didn't start until 5 p.m. and they're handling those candidates that are only available after hours. It's just created some different work models, which I think is also fresh and exciting, right?
Well, no, absolutely. And it's funny you should say that, because one of the strategies, potential strategies I suggested then was exactly something to that effect, right? If that is the demand of the business in the short term, reduce
Yeah,
someone's hours and they're taking care of everybody's clients in that time frame, right? Weekends is another great example, especially if you're in a light industrial space,
yeah,
right? Stuff happens over the weekends,
yeah,
right? But instead of every single person being looking after their own accounts over the weekend, have it so that somebody is working, rotation or something, and then
yeah,
give them time off in lieu. There's many different ways to be able to actually compensate that and ensure that work life balance. One of the things I was thinking as you were talking earlier, is a lot of people, and I think to some degree this is contributing to the burnout, and especially in our industry, is during COVID, it was make more calls. Just make more calls. You're not talking to enough people, make more calls, right?
yeah,
And you know how I feel about having KPIs for the sake of having KPIs, right?
right.
Um, they're a terrible tool if you don't know how to use them. When you know how to use them, they're a fantastic tool. But I think certainly what I heard, and it wasn't just here in Canada, in all our regions, was everybody automatically seemed to have flicked to putting pressure on. Well, you need to be talking to more people. You need to be, and that kind of that was a solution. Whereas what people needed at that time was the empathy part. Now, I'm not saying every single leader didn't do the empathy. That's not what I'm saying. But it seemed to be in this instant. Um, the employee welfare piece, whilst yes, they all talked about it, not everybody walked it. And I think they're the ones that are seeing, unfortunately, for the employees, the higher burnout rates in our business. But having said that, they're the ones that are also now losing staff,
Right.
right? Because the market has picked back up and employees are empowered, and they know they don't have to put up with that,
Yeah.
right?
And you can't sprint all the way through, right? So I think people that feel like they've been sprinting nonstop for 18 months are the ones that are hitting that wall, right? So I agree. You have to give a little bit of that balance and allow people to have breath, right? Or you're going to be in that point where you collapse. You can't do anymore.
Yeah, it's like you're trying to run a marathon,
Yeah.
but at the speed you'd run a 100-meter race, right?
Yeah.
It's just not going. At some stage, you're going to crash and burn, right?
Right.
So let me move on to my next question. In a time where we're connected, literally more than ever, I feel the most some people feel most disconnected from their co-workers. So on one side, yeah, we're really really connected, but on the other side we're really disconnected from the co-workers. How do we as leaders fix this?
Yeah. And you're right, as leaders, we're the ones that own that, right? I don't think our colleague or our workers always know exactly how to fix that. It's been interesting because as we're starting to come back into the offices more and start to have, team meetings and, smaller groups coming together, one thing that I've really noticed is that when we are coming together, the interactions are much more meaningful. It actually got me really thinking about, maybe we need to have less face to face, right? Maybe we don't need to go back to 5 days a week face to face, but we need to make sure that when we are getting people together, that there's meaning to it. And we're giving people the opportunity to have that combination of not only, working together, but giving them that social aspect, because it's been incredible to see as you're bringing teams together, some of them who may have not even met each other because there's new members of the team, they feel like they know each other. So then when they're getting to see each other in person, it's like seeing an old friend. So I thought that was really an interesting piece of it because we've added so many new people to our organization this year just because of growth, over 100 people. So there's a lot of people that have never met the teams that they're on. Yet I feel that and I know a lot of them have shared this, that they do feel connected because they're actually finding ways to go grab coffee with somebody on the weekend or to reach out and do something. And I'm not talking about a Zoom happy hour, but like actually finding a way to pick up the phone and say, hey, Suki, how are you? It's not a work meeting. It's not a Teams meeting. I just want to understand how you're doing. And I think that's because their leaders and those managers of those teams have actually pushed for that to happen, right? They want to make sure that their teams are getting to know each other out of that kind of back-to-back Teams call, schedule that we all get into.
Yeah, because I think Zoom team fatigue is a real thing,
Oh, for
right?
sure.
Um,
Yeah.
because pre-pandemic, we were all like, we want to work from home, right? Get rid of offices altogether. Certainly in my case, I'm like, nope, I want hybrid. And there's some people that I talk to like, no, I much prefer to go. I'd rather be in an office, right?
Yeah.
I just want to add follow-up question to that for you. Is there a defined way forward for coming back to the office? Is it going to be hybrid? Or are you not at that stage where you know exactly what that's going to look like next year?
I think, well, and I think it's a little bit different for every company. And so if you look at, we'll just look at Adecco. For the whole pandemic, we've had half of our workforce literally face to face on site at clients, on the front lines of making sure essential business is staffed, and the other half of our colleagues who've been able to work from home. So you have just two very different worlds, and now we're trying to figure out how do we come back together. I think it will be a hybrid model where we're able to have a couple of days in the office, a couple of days work from home, because our colleagues are telling us that they want that. They don't want the hour-long commute. They want to be able to pick up their kids from school. They like the flexibility, and as long as they're being productive and they're hitting those KPIs and we're getting the output, then we're good with that, right? As long as we're able to still meet our candidates where they need to be met and we're able to keep business moving forward. I think the other thing we're trying to really solve for right now, and I would assume probably other people in this space too that have on-site present clients, is how do we allow those people to have some of that same flexibility? Can we do some sort of rotation with other colleagues? Can we allow people to have some of the same flexibility where 1 or 2 days a week they're able to work from home and maybe do some sourcing or things like that, and somebody else can be on site at that client? So I think we still have some work to do on that front, but it will be some version of a hybrid model. There was something that was really interesting. I ask clients about this all the time because I find it fascinating to see where everybody falls on the spectrum. Some people can be 100% remote, and some people's business just doesn't allow for that. But I got a great best practice from a client who told me that they started looking at all their job types and bucketing them into 3 areas. So they bucketed them into like, is your job type a nomad? Can you do it from anywhere? Maybe you're a salesperson and you can, be wherever you want to be. Is your job hybrid, where you do need to still have some face-to-face, but there are days where you could be home, or are you 100% face-to-face? So they looked at their organization, not the people, but the organization and the job types, bucketed everything, and then said, okay, now let's look at the people piece and let's see where we need to move things around. Because maybe this person that used to be 100% face-to-face needs a bit more flexibility, and we can figure out how to give that to them. So I just thought we're going through that now. I thought it was a really interesting way to kind of approach what the business needs and then also kind of marry in what your colleagues are asking for.
That's actually a great idea. I can't remember who I was speaking to just recently. It might even be yourself. We were talking about salespeople coming into the office and then finance not necessarily having to come into the office because it can be done remotely. And I can't remember who I was speaking to. And they said, but their finance team are actually saying, we want to come into the office.
Yeah.
Right. So you're smiling. Was that yourself that you and I had
It
that
was.
conversation? Oh,
Yeah,
okay. There
because
you
I was,
go.
well, it was funny because I was surprised by that, but they're like, we miss people. We want to get back to the team, not only just their team, but the interactions with the other teams. And it actually, I think, is a good, it fits well with what we were saying about making those meaningful interactions. When people are coming back to the office, maybe it's twice a month or once a week where everybody's in the office on the same day. I think that's more impactful than everybody feeling like they have to be there 5 days a week to see people face to face.
Yeah, it's because the reason I brought that up is typically we tend to think the salespeople, right?
Yeah.
We need to be in the office a little bit more because we're active listening, learning, and all the rest of it. We kind of think, and we kind of tend to forget the operation side of the business, right?
Yeah,
But they have the same challenges,
yeah.
that people piece, right? That people coming in and connecting. So, okay, so let's move on. Um, Now, I kind of did touch on this one, but I'm actually going to ask the question because I think there's more detail to this. Another factor in mental wellness is the change to hybrid work models with shorter hours and more flexibility. Companies are trying to decide if they should go 100% remote. Should there be pay differentials based on work location? How do you manage these different worker types in the workforce? What are you seeing as successful business models across your clients? And maybe share some of the best practices for our listeners today who are trying to figure out how they can adapt. I know there's loads of parts to that one question.
I think I really do think one of the best practices I've kind of gotten from different client conversations is the one I just talked about, where really bucketing your job types to figure out what your business actually needs, right? And figuring out how you're going to service the different pieces of your business. But when you do think now about, let's use those three examples, right? You're going to have some people that are hybrid, some people that are 100% remote, and others that are face to face all the time. That requires different management of each of those groups, right? So again, I think that there has to be KPIs and productivity measures to make sure that people are doing the work that they need to be doing. But I think there's also a different skill that our leaders and managers have to also understand too, with how to get those teams to collaborate with each other. Right. So what are the tools that we're using? Like, when you're in an office and you're a branch, there's like a buzz to everybody kind of working together and people are handing things off, and it's just a different feel than how we're working now. So are there ways that you can create some of that? And maybe it is coming in twice a week and having everybody together so that you can attack some of those big, issues and problem solving type things together. And then on the other days, you kind of know what you have to do. And it's a little bit more of a, okay, get those things done, and then I'll be back in the office. But the interesting thing about that, Suki, and I don't know if this is the same across the industry, but I know it's this way for my team. Our managers and leaders don't have the skills necessarily to understand how to manage remote workforce. So I think there's an opportunity for us to upskill some of our own colleagues in really teaching them how to have a different type of empathy to that work, how to manage through that, how to drive, to your point, not just the KPI, but the real outcome and what needs to change maybe with the KPI if you're not getting the outcome because you are not side by side. You don't pick up on the conversation. You can't always add the coaching. Those are different skills. And I've, even prior to the pandemic, I've had opportunities where I've worked 100% remote, and you learn those things as you do that. But for a lot of people who've been in an office, all this time leading up to the pandemic, they don't know how to do that. So I think it's a big opportunity for us to be able to start helping people understand how to be great, effective managers, even when they're not side by side their employees.
I think you bring up a really great point because we kind of got thrown into this situation, right? So you don't know what you don't know, and everybody's trying to find their way. And most people took their management style for pre-pandemic and just transitioned it over here. But I think the other piece that happened is the trust piece, and I'm not saying that's a conscious thing, but I think, and I wonder how much trust has contributed to the burnout, people feeling burnt out and things like that. Because when somebody's in the office, you see them, you hear them, you see what's really happening,
Yeah,
right? But when someone's working from home, you don't have that frame of reference. And so naturally, well, not naturally, but understandably, when you're not able to get hold of someone, the question is, okay, where are they? I've messaged them 5 times, right?
right.
That kind of stuff, right? And I think that, so whilst I'm not saying it's a conscious, people are not trusting their employees, that's not what I'm saying, although I'm sure there's some people where that does apply. I just think people just again, don't know what they don't know. And you said earlier, is it just something within Adecco that you've had to upskill? No, it's right across the board.
Yeah.
I had to learn how to manage a fully remote workforce,
Yeah.
right? And I think it's really important to mention here, we made mistakes,
Yes. And
right?
being okay with that and letting our teams know that that's okay, right? We're all learning this together. We all, like you said, got thrown into it. Nobody has all the answers. I think that's important too. You can't empower your people and then make them nervous that if they make a mistake, they can't ask for help, right?
Yeah. And that's that trust piece coming back in, though, isn't it? But I
Yeah.
think also, as a leader, when you say, "Oh, I made a mistake," or "I don't have the answers here," you're also letting your workforce know, I'm admitting I don't have the answers here. In fact, just from a mental health perspective, I'm admitting I'm struggling,
Yeah.
right? I haven't got it all together,
Yes.
right? That is also allowing them to see the authentic version of you. And it's also allowing them to almost, I can't, I'm sure there's a better way to phrase this, but give themselves permission to actually ask for help
Yeah.
and admit things aren't working, right? Admit they're struggling and without fear of reprimand,
Yes.
right?
You're so right.
Yeah,
I
none of us knew. Sorry, go
No,
on.
and when I came here too, coming to a new country and a new team, I really didn't know what I didn't know, right? I might know Adecco and know some of the things that I thought needed to happen, but I didn't know the culture. I didn't know the teams. I didn't know what had previously happened. And so when I talk about like getting out and talking with all the teams, I mean, it was almost 3 months straight of, hour to 2 hour roundtables with every single branch, group, team. I mean, I talked to every single person face to face, and it was exactly what you just said, Suki. What's working, what's not. Let's just have an open conversation. And the interesting thing is the first few that I did, everyone was super quiet. They didn't feel like that was authentic, right? They didn't know what to expect. But then the word started getting out because I think it did a lot of what you just said. Hey, here's what I've struggled with. Here's what I'm noticing. Here are some things I learned the hard way in this last year in the US during the pandemic. And pretty soon people started to trust that, okay, this isn't like looking for all the things we're going wrong. There's real questions here. We're asking the hard questions because we want to fix the problems. And like it was like the floodgates opened, right? In terms of people giving ideas and starting to share. So I think that point that you bring up about being authentic at work, everybody wants to bring their authentic self to work, but that has to start from the leadership level, right? In every group, people have to make that okay, make having a mistake okay, but also be open enough to talk about it and figure out how to problem solve it. Otherwise, you're never going to have that progress or the opportunity to keep learning and growing.
And I think also some of the things that I've seen and what's I see working and where I see it doesn't really work is where leaders go in and they're having these town hall meetings, right? Yeah, the leader's doing all the talking,
Yes.
right?
You
Doing
can't.
all the talking, right? And then they're going away saying, yes, well, we listen to our people. We have these monthly, weekly, whatever it is, town hall meetings where they're talking at their people.
Yes.
They're talking about how amazing they are because you know what? During these difficult times, I've cost cut the business into profitability, and of course they're not using those words; they're my words, right? And people are just sitting there saying, "What about us?" Right?
Yeah.
So I just want to get that bit in. Is if you are doing these town hall meetings, or you should be, who's doing all the talking?
Yes.
Because if it's you doing all the talking, kind of defeats the object, right? Because then it
Yep.
becomes the leader's show.
Yes, exactly. And it's such a good point because I remember when I first started getting ready to go into these meetings, I literally had 3 questions written down. It was the same 3 questions for every meeting, and I maybe asked follow-up questions if certain things came out, but that was it. There was no talking points. There was no, okay, this is part of the agenda that I have to convey to people. It was truly listening and asking tough questions, right? So if you pick up on something that someone says, digging in a little bit more, I think that's the most effective way to truly understand what your teams are thinking, right? You're right. If you talk at them, they're just going to shut down. I'm going to say, okay, they're telling me what I'm supposed to think instead of really asking what I truly think.
That's it. Because what ends up happening is it becomes a sales meeting. If
Yeah.
you want to have a sales meeting, call it a sales meeting.
Yeah.
Right?
Perfect.
If you want to beat someone up for numbers and all the rest of it, and you want to tell people, deliver your sales results because look how great I am as a leader, um, then let's call that it.
Yeah.
But I think it's really important. I just wanted to get that bit in there. That's like, yeah, you've got to listen to them. You've got to, and I think it's the message is beginning to get across, but not as fast as I'd like to see it because there's still some leaders who are still having these town hall meetings, or call them what you like, and they're talking at people, right? And they're the ones that are seeing the churn and burn. They're
Yeah.
starting to see that churn and burn. Um, okay, so take me on to the next question, churn and burn. We hear a lot about the great resignation.
Yeah.
As a leader in the staffing industry, what are you seeing?
It's so funny. I heard this coined as the great reevaluation instead of the
Okay.
great resignation. And I actually really love that because I think that's exactly what's happening is people are reevaluating their situation. Does this work for me? Does it work with my schedule? Is this the work I want to be doing? Is the culture flexible? Are my managers adaptable? They're asking all these questions about, is this the right fit for me now that I've seen what it's like to be in this completely remote environment and I'm not sure if it works, or maybe I'm still happy. So I think that there's a lot of that going on. And it's interesting because I think that as an organization or any leader in an organization, we have an opportunity that if we are asking the right questions, we're going to see the signs of what is happening in the people that are not necessarily happy with the way that we're moving. And so what you just said actually in terms of listening, I think is probably the most critical thing as it relates to the great resignation. People are jumping ship. People are saying, this doesn't work for anymore and I'm leaving. And sometimes they're leaving without other opportunities because it just doesn't make sense. Or the company they're at has drawn a line in the sand and said, this is how it's going to be, even if that's not what you like. And they don't feel like they can voice their opinion or that they'll be heard. So I think any leader in an organization, it is so critical that we ask the questions. We might not always be able to say, hey, I know that's what you want and I can give you that, but we need to ask and we need to have the dialogue and at least see, if we can't come to what they want to do, then at least let's have the conversation around it and help them understand instead of just putting our head in the sand and saying, this is how it's going to be, and then seeing all the people fall off. I think it's a huge, huge issue in multiple countries right now that is continuing to get worse because organizations are not asking and not listening to what colleagues are telling them.
But I think also to your point about people leaving without another job. So I'll just stick to Canada, although it
Yeah,
applies in other countries as well. COVID happened, government stepped in. You had the government subsidies come in, you had CERB come in, all that stuff, right?
yeah,
And people were working from home. People also saved their commuting costs. And with commuting costs, inevitably goes up the 10 cups of Tim Hortons or Starbucks that you're buying a day. And now you're not doing that anymore. People didn't weren't allowed to socialize, right? Because of
yeah,
the lockdown. So they weren't spending that. Daycares, so they weren't spending that money, right?
yeah,
Um, so what ended up happening is that money's sitting in the bank. They're saving that money. And
yeah,
I don't know to what degree this is true, but certainly what I'm hearing from our industry is people actually, beginning of the summer, just looked at it and said, that's it, the market is back. I don't have to work for this
yeah,
bully,
yeah,
right, anymore. I need time out. I need time out. In the past, people have like left a job, gone to the next one because there's this fear of being unemployed, cash in the bank, and all that kind of stuff, right? But what they've done is they're looking at it and saying, actually, no, I'm going to take the summer out. I'm going to look after myself, my own
yeah,
mental well-being. I'm going to spend time with my family. I'm going to do all of that. Then I'm going to choose.
Yeah.
when I come into the workforce, but also where I'm going to come in, whether I'm going to stay in a particular industry or I'm going, because I have choices,
Yeah.
right? And that comes back to that empowerment piece, right? It comes back to that empowerment piece because employees are empowered. And you mentioned earlier about not listening to people and then drawing a line in the sand. I totally agree with everything you're saying. But when you are listening to people and people feel they have been heard, and then you've had to make a business decision, which is best for the overall good,
Yeah.
and it may not suit this particular individual, and then they decide that they're moving on, they're deciding to move on, but they're happy.
Yes.
Right? It's
Yes.
not that they were ignored or anything like that. And that feeds right back into your brand,
Yeah.
right? Which will
Well,
come back.
yes. And you're right, though, because if it's a decision that's made because, hey, the business needs have changed and this no longer works, we can't accommodate what you're asking for. What can we do, right? And whether we can find them a new role within the organization or they choose to leave, that is very different than somebody getting frustrated because they feel nobody's listening to them and they say, I'm out because this no longer works for me, right? It's communication.
Yeah. And just on the flip side of that, um, those companies that are trying to hire
Mm.
um, and just throwing money at the problem without fixing all the other things, well, you're just putting a band-aid on.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you think is the answer, and I'm not just talking our industry. It doesn't matter what skill set we're talking, right? What the company or what particular industry the company is in. The reality is, if you haven't fixed any of these things that we're talking about, and then you just think, okay, those people have left. I'm going to hire a new set of people. If you don't fix those problems,
You're not
though,
gonna
you just got that churn and burn, right? You got that churn and
turnover.
burn.
Turnover almost always goes back to culture,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Culture, something is wrong with the culture if you're experiencing massive amounts of turnover, and I think that applies across all industries.
Yeah, and also when that is happening, I'm a strong believer that as leaders, we kind of got to look in the mirror because
Yes,
that's the problem staring right back at you.
yes, 100%.
Because at some stages you can do it isolated and stuff happens. I get that, right? But as a business, if we are experiencing that um, churn and burn, okay, and it's constant, and you're bringing in new people, and you're trying to throw money at that problem, yet without fixing all the other things, that's a strategy issue, that is a leadership issue, and maybe that's the time to change some of that leadership team,
Yeah,
right? Because and I'll bring it back to our industry, there seems to be this tendency to blame local level staff, right? Be it the branch manager, be it the regional manager. Nobody ever sits that boardroom table. That's where the problem is sitting. And that's where we've got to look at first and say, okay, who ran this boardroom table needs replacing or
yeah,
coaching, as the case may be, right? Um, and it all always comes back down to exactly what you said. It's the culture piece, right? So let me ask you this question. We've talked a lot, and I'm really conscious of time. I know you touched on it earlier, but do you want to share some of the things that are coming down the line, 2022? What can we expect?
I I can share a little bit. I think there is a lot of excitement that is happening within the organization because we are really, I mentioned earlier that we were talking about the different groups of people and how we can really impact the experience as it relates to each of those, and what can we be doing differently. So a big piece of that, in my opinion, is the candidate and associate experience, because I do think that when we talk about this great resignation and you see what's happening even at the associate level, right, and the contractor level, you have very similar patterns. You have people that maybe have always worked in a retail job and they don't want to be face to face anymore, or they can't be because now they have responsibilities and they have, kids to pick up, or the schedule no longer works for them. And how do you help that person still stay employed? Can you help give them the skills to take on a remote call center job, for example? Can you help transition people out of one workforce to another because that doesn't work for them anymore? So I think the same way that we're talking about that with our own colleagues in our organization, I think there's a whole population of candidates and associates that we can offer that to as well. So going back to that reskilling and upskilling, we have some programs that are going to be coming out very specific to really help, whether it be a new candidate coming to us or people that are already working at some of our organizations, to learn new skills that give them the opportunity to make more money, or maybe move into another industry that they want to move into, but they don't necessarily have that skill set right now. And I think that goes back to making the future work for everyone, right? We have to be able to understand what's coming down the pipe. Where are the skills of the future? How can we help get people ready for that and help them on that journey, instead of always just trying to look at the candidate and filling the order?
I think you've actually just brought up a great point. We've been talking a lot about our employees, our staff, colleagues, and things like that. Candidates also have choices,
Yes.
right? And candidates are also looking at the agency of choice that they're working with, and they're looking at how they're being treated there. And it doesn't matter whether you're doing professional services, light industrial. It really doesn't matter what vertical you're working in, recruiting in. Ultimately, if you're treating that candidate as a means to an end, that's where you're going to see the churn and burn in your candidate base as well. That's where
Right.
you're going to see the candidates that are not loyal to you, who are leaving an assignment couple of days in because they've got a better role over there without any of that communication piece. But where you're building that relationship and you're actually treating them as a partner,
Yeah.
that's where that loyalty is going to come in. Because I think that piece gets not for, yeah, I kind of think it does get forgotten in many ways, because what we end
Right.
up doing is focusing so much on that client, our internal staff, that we forget there's a third component. And without that third component, none of us have a business,
Right.
right?
And I always say that when we talk about being people first and being a people industry, right, is that you cannot say that you're people first and forget about the person that is your candidate and your associate. and you're absolutely right. It's three legs to the stool, right? And we forget about that a lot. And so that's a lot of what we are focused on for next year, is figuring out how we change that journey, right? And how we really impact that population, and give them something new and fresh to be excited about, right? By working with us.
Yeah. And I think, and then there's just another quick point, and Craig and I were talking about this last week. Um, Canada is a country built on immigration,
Yeah.
and we need the immigration here.
Yes.
And there is a huge talent pool out there that doesn't have Canadian experience.
Mm-hmm.
And we're sitting here saying we need the talent, we need the people to come to work, yet we're, in some industries and sectors, we're overlooking that amazing talent pool.
Yeah.
Right. So I think as an industry, we need to open our eyes up a little bit more and look at that pool of amazing talent and say, how do we help them? How do we bring them into the market? Because here's the thing, we all want Canadian experience. Well, if we don't give them the Canadian experience, how do they get the Canadian experience?
Yes, and I think some of that flexibility that we're talking about, and the way to look at some of these, like we were talking about colleagues, and what does the job require, and what is it that they need? I mean, we have to have those conversations with our clients too, and potential clients, about what kind of flexibility we need. I know you would like this to be a set schedule, but are you open to having student populations on the weekends, or people without that Canadian experience? Because we know we have untapped talent pools if we can find the right fit for them, right? We are the matchmakers. We have to find the right fit for those pools of talent, and then also equip them with the skills. I'm super passionate about that, because I think that again ties to making the future work for everyone, not just the groups we decide to make it work for,
Yep.
but everyone in our communities.
Yeah, and that's where it comes back to, you were saying earlier on, the community impact,
Yes.
right? And that's where that becomes really, really critical. And if you look at the last 18 months or so, well, Canada's come out of lockdown, what, a couple of months ago? So at least only the last 12 months. I'm
Yep.
sure there was that untapped candidate pool there that could have covered some of those roles. And it's our job,
Yeah.
the collective we, to help educate our clients, because when they are saying we want Canadian experience, why?
Yeah.
Right now, there's
Right.
certain things where you need the laws, and I get all
Sure.
of that, right? But why? And I bet you 9 times out of 10, when you actually ask the why question, and they pause to think about it, they're going to be like, actually, no, that's, for lack of a better word, old school thinking.
Yeah. Nobody's asked us why, so we've just kept doing it.
We've just kept doing it, right?
Yeah.
You didn't ask us. So maybe from that perspective, it is time to be having those tough conversations. Well, they're not really tough conversations, but those conversations that you may perceive as tough with your clients, and your clients are going to be like, well, if this means I get my people, and my products get out the door on time, or my calls are answered, or this happens, that happens, and my business is moving forward, they're going to be like, hey, that's a solution. Why
Yeah.
not? Right.
Right.
And I think we have to get comfortable asking the question. We can't see it as challenging. In fact, we're doing a disservice to our clients
And
and
I
our
think
candidate
actually,
pool.
yeah, I think you actually bring up a great point too, because something we've definitely learned through all of this is that we have to move from, I think the most effective ways that we can continue to help clients and even potential clients is having to move away from the transactional conversations to being solution oriented. And I think that there are no new problems that people are experiencing that they don't know how to solve. And when you start having these conversations, you start to realize and peel away all these different pieces that maybe give you a different way to approach it. But if you're not asking those questions, if you're not digging in, if you're not approaching it from that solution side of things, and you're just worrying about taking care of the immediate need that's in front of you, you're never going to get to that.
Yeah. And I would add to that, and I know we're running out of time, but I would also add to that, if as an industry, as a consultant, as a leader, as a manager, we've sat in front of a client and we've asked that question, why, and they are totally dismissive, and there's just no valid reason, so to speak, right? Maybe that client isn't the right client for you. Maybe you should really not be working with that client, because what you're doing is um, you're doing their selection for them, not on skill. That's their
Yeah.
own conscious. Well, then it will be conscious bias, right? You don't want to get caught up in that. There are so many clients over here that are going to value that conversation. Don't allow a company to discriminate against a group via you. So that's the stage where, as an industry, I hope everybody's already doing it. But if we're not, as an industry, we need to be saying, sorry, Mr. Client, not prepared. We can't work with you on those terms. And it's having the confidence to walk away, because the more confidence we have to walk away, the more we elevate our industry,
Yeah.
right? And go and work with those sole clients that are aligned with you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Exactly.
got to wrap up. We could go on forever here. Any final thoughts you'd like to share?
Suki, this was great. I think in the spirit of Thanksgiving, which is a couple days away, I'm
Hmm.
thankful to you, obviously getting me plugged in, like I said, with getting to know some of the people in the industry and giving an opportunity to have the follow-up one-on-one has just been great. I mean, I know we could talk for hours about all of this, and it's just been great to be able to share a little bit about what we're doing. So I welcome anybody that's listening and participating today to connect with me on LinkedIn if you have more questions or you want to know anything more. If you want to join the team at Adecco Canada, we are thrilled to keep the conversation going. So thank you for having me.
Fantastic. Really appreciate you. Oh, there you go. So Mark says spot on. We must continue to move to truly consult with our clients, not purely transactional. Transact, absolutely. That's it. What it boils down to. Lisa says, "Thank you so much. Another great session. Great reminder to ask those tough questions, even though we
Yeah.
may fear the answer." Yeah, yeah. We may not like the answer we hear, but you know what? We need to hear the answer because we
Yeah.
need to walk away. If enough of us walk away from those accounts, they have no option but to change. They have no option but to rethink, right? So, Janelle, thank you ever so much for your time and your input. And I'm sure you'll be back because I want to see 2022. Thanks.
Thank you.
You take care. Bye for
You
now.
too.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.